My parents called off my 20th birthday for my sister's tantrum, so I quietly moved out and watched their perfect life fall apart without me. I just turned 23 days ago. But you wouldn't know it from looking at my life, because my parents cancelled my birthday party at the very last minute to appease my spoiled older sister Natalie. And honestly, she wasn't even supposed to be anywhere near Seattle for my celebration, which had been a massive relief when I first found out. But as luck would have it, the universe conspired against me. The day Natalie was supposed to fly from Portland to Miami with her influencer friends for some exclusive Fashion Week event she'd been planning for 6 months, a massive snowstorm swept through the Pacific Northwest. Every flight got grounded. Airlines were scrambling. And my sister? She was absolutely losing her mind about missing her precious event, which meant my parents spent the entire day before my birthday walking on eggshells around their golden child, terrified of setting off another one of her legendary meltdowns. She's been the favorite for as long as I can remember. At 25, she still has our parents wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger, and they'll do absolutely anything to keep her happy. So when she marched into our kitchen on the morning of my birthday and announced that my party needed to be cancelled, I shouldn't have been surprised by what happened next. Her exact words were burned into my memory. If I can't have my fun in Miami, then Vera doesn't get to have hers either. And my parents? They didn't even blink. Within minutes, they were sending cancellation texts to everyone who'd been invited to my celebration. My college friends from University of Washington, our extended family driving in from Spokane and Tacoma, everyone. The kicker? They didn't tell me a single thing about it. I spent that entire day completely oblivious, helping Mom arrange the decorations we'd picked up from Target the week before. I hung fairy lights around our backyard, tied ribbons on chairs, and set up a photo backdrop near the deck. I even spent 3 hours baking my signature lemon blueberry cake from scratch, the recipe my grandmother had taught me when I was 12. Everything looked absolutely perfect as the Seattle sunset painted our yard in shades of pink and gold. As evening crept closer, I kept refreshing my phone, expecting messages from friends asking about parking or what time they should arrive. But my screen stayed eerily silent. By 7 o'clock, when nobody had shown up yet, worry started gnawing at my stomach. By 8, I was genuinely confused. By 9, full panic had set in. Mom? Dad? I called out, finding them sprawled on the living room couch watching some Netflix documentary like it was just another ordinary Thursday night. Where is everyone? Did something happen? Is there traffic? That's when they finally decided to tell me the truth. They'd cancelled my 20th birthday party, the milestone I'd been planning and dreaming about for months, without even asking me first. All because Natalie was sulking about her stupid Miami trip getting postponed. The rage that erupted inside me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about one ruined party. This was about 20 years of being treated like I was invisible, of always being second place to my sister's needs, wants, and tantrums. And this moment right here? It was about to become the catalyst that would destroy everything they'd built. I completely lost it. I started screaming at my parents in a way I'd never done before, my voice echoing through our suburban Seattle home. How could they do this to me? It was supposed to be my special day, my 20th birthday, my entrance into real adulthood. They were the ones who'd suggested throwing a big celebration in the first place, who'd helped me create the guest list, who'd insisted we invite all our relatives from across Washington state. Vera, sweetheart, you need to understand, Mom said, wringing her hands nervously and refusing to meet my eyes. Natalie is just absolutely devastated about missing her Miami event. We didn't think it would be appropriate to have a celebration when she's in such a fragile emotional state. Fragile. The word made me want to scream even louder. She's 25 years old. I shouted back, my hands shaking with fury. I'm the one turning 20, and you cancelled my entire party because she threw a tantrum like a toddler. My parents had always treated Natalie differently. Always more carefully, always prioritizing her feelings above mine. Throughout my entire childhood, I'd been expected to give up the last slice of pizza if Natalie wanted it, to let her pick what we watched on TV every single night, to avoid wearing the same style of clothes she liked because it might upset her personal brand aesthetic. I got her hammer-downs and thrift store finds while she got shopping sprees at University Village. But this crossed every single line I'd ever drawn. Lower your voice right now, Dad warned sharply, glancing toward the staircase with genuine concern in his eyes. You're going to wake up Natalie. She finally managed to fall asleep after being upset all day. That made me even angrier. Even now, even in the middle of ruining my birthday, they were more worried about disturbing their precious older daughter than addressing what they'd done to me. I found out later that they'd told everyone I was sick with a severe migraine and had specifically requested that nobody contact me for at least 24 hours. That's why my phone had been so silent all evening. My friends actually thought they were being considerate and respectful by giving me space to recover. The level of manipulation was absolutely breathtaking. As I continued yelling, pouring out 18 years of bottled-up frustration and hurt, Natalie came gliding down the stairs in her silk designer pajamas, looking perfectly rested and wearing that smug expression I knew so well. "What's all this noise about?" she asked innocently, as if she had no idea what was happening. "Some of us are trying to rest and process our disappointment." When I turned on her and told her exactly how selfish and entitled she was being, she had the absolute audacity to lecture me about empathy and consideration. "I'm going through something incredibly difficult right now," she said dramatically, flipping her highlighted blonde hair over her shoulder. "If you can't see how completely heartless it would be to throw a party while I'm suffering such a major setback, then you're way more spoiled than I ever thought." That's when something inside me completely snapped. I lunged at her, grabbing a fistful of her perfectly styled hair, and within seconds we were in a full-blown physical fight right there in our Seattle living room. We knocked over a lamp, sent couch pillows flying everywhere. Our parents had to physically pull us apart, and that's exactly when we all heard it. The doorbell. None of us had heard it ring during all the chaos and shouting, but someone was standing at our front door. And that someone was about to change absolutely everything about my life. When Dad opened the door, my grandfather stood. They're looking like justice personified, all 6 feet 2 inches of distinguished presence, wearing his usual pressed khakis and navy polo shirt. Grandpa Lawrence had always been the family patriarch, the one person everyone genuinely respected and maybe even feared a little bit. Even my parents straightened their postures when he walked into any room. "What in the hell is going on in this house?" he demanded, his sharp eyes taking in my disheveled appearance and Natalie's messed-up hair. I could hear shouting from halfway down the driveway. Under normal circumstances, I would never tell anyone outside our immediate family about the way my parents treated me. The constant favoritism had always seemed too petty to complain about, and I'd learned early on to keep family business strictly private. But something about this specific moment, my cancelled birthday, Natalie's smirk, my parents' complete indifference to my feelings, broke something fundamental inside me. So I told Grandpa Lawrence everything. Not just about tonight, but about years and years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. About always having to sacrifice for Natalie's comfort. About never being allowed to outshine the golden child. About feeling invisible in my own family despite living under the same roof for 2 decades. The expression on my grandfather's face shifted from confusion to shock to absolute fury within seconds. "Is this true?" he asked my parents sharply, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Before they could even formulate an answer, he continued speaking. "Because if what Vera's telling me is accurate, then you've been lying to me for years about how you're raising these girls." That's when I learned something that completely changed my understanding of our entire family dynamic. Grandpa Lawrence revealed that he'd been sending my parents money every single month for the past 4 years. Their small accounting firm in Bellevue had been struggling financially, and they'd been on the verge of bankruptcy multiple times. My grandfather had been quietly keeping our entire family afloat, paying for everything from our mortgage to our groceries. Even my birthday party, the one they just cancelled, had been paid for entirely by him. "I've been supporting this family because I genuinely believed you were raising both girls with equal love and fairness," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. But clearly, I was completely wrong about that. Natalie, being the absolute fool she's always been, decided this was somehow the perfect moment to argue with our grandfather. She launched into a speech about how traumatizing it was that her Miami trip had been cancelled, how she couldn't possibly be expected to watch other people celebrate when she was experiencing such emotional pain. Grandpa Lawrence looked at her like she'd just spoken complete gibberish. "You think the entire world revolves around you, don't you?" he said quietly, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been yelling. "You think your 25-year-old tantrum is more important than your sister's 20th birthday?" The silence that filled our living room was absolutely deafening. Then my grandfather delivered the words that would change everything. "I'm done supporting this family financially. From this moment forward, you're completely on your own." He turned to face me directly. Vera, go upstairs and pack your bags right now. You're coming to live with me. The chaos that erupted after Grandpa Lawrence's announcement was something I'd never witnessed before in my entire life. My parents immediately forgot all about me and started frantically trying to negotiate with my grandfather, literally begging him not to withdraw his financial support. Dad, please, let's talk about this rationally and calmly, my father pleaded, actually following Grandpa Lawrence around our living room like a desperate child. Maybe we made some minor mistakes in judgment, but we can absolutely work this out. We can change our approach. We didn't realize how things looked from an outside perspective, Mom added desperately, tears starting to form in her eyes. We were just trying to be sensitive to Natalie's needs. But my grandfather wasn't listening to any of their bargaining or excuses. His entire focus was on me. Vera, do you want to come live with me? He asked directly, looking me straight in the eyes. Because I can see very clearly now that this environment isn't healthy for you in any way. I didn't hesitate for even a second. Yes. What struck me hardest in that moment was that even as my parents desperately begged Grandpa Lawrence to reconsider cutting off their money, neither of them tried to convince me to stay. They weren't upset about losing their daughter. They were upset about losing his financial support. It was the final confirmation that everything I'd suspected about their priorities was absolutely correct. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and quickly started packing my essential belongings. Clothes, my laptop, my favorite books, the few pieces of jewelry that actually belonged to me rather than being Natalie's cast-offs. As I stuffed everything into my suitcases, I could hear the argument continuing downstairs, my parents' voices getting more and more desperate by the minute. When I came back down carrying my bags, Grandpa Lawrence was already heading toward the front door. He didn't even look back at his son as we walked out of the house I'd lived in for 20 years. I should have done this a long time ago, he said as we drove through the familiar streets of Seattle toward his house in Medina. I knew something wasn't quite right, but I kept hoping things would somehow improve on their own. His house felt like an absolute sanctuary after living with the constant tension of my parents and Natalie. Grandpa Lawrence had always been incredibly successful. He'd been one of Washington's top corporate lawyers before retiring at 65, and his home reflected that lifetime of achievement. But more importantly than the luxury, it felt genuinely peaceful. You'll stay here as long as you need to, he told me that first night over dinner at his kitchen table. Through the summer, through college if you want, whatever you need to feel safe and supported. For the first time in years, I actually felt like someone cared about my well-being as a priority, not as an afterthought. But my parents weren't going to give up that easily. My phone started buzzing almost immediately with their desperate attempts to get me back. Not because they actually missed me or realized they'd been wrong, but because they needed me to somehow convince Grandpa Lawrence to restore their financial lifeline. The real battle was just beginning, and I was about to discover exactly how far they'd go to manipulate me back into their lives. What they didn't know was that I was done being their pawn, and I was about to test their priorities in a way that would expose their true nature once and for all. My parents' desperation became more obvious and pathetic with every passing day. Text messages, voicemails, emails, they tried every possible method to reach me. But their apologies felt completely hollow. And calculated, clearly designed to manipulate me back into their lives, so they could restore their relationship with Grandpa Lawrence. We realize we made some mistakes, honey, Mom's messages read. We always thought you were stronger and more independent than Natalie, so we focused more attention on her because she genuinely seemed to need it more. We are so sorry we took your strength for granted. The excuses were absolutely infuriating. Natalie is 5 years older than me. If anything, she should have been the mature one capable of handling shared parental attention. But they were trying to reframe their obvious favoritism as somehow being a compliment to my character. After a full week of ignoring their increasingly frantic messages, I finally responded. I told my father exactly what I thought of their fake apologies, how I knew they only wanted me back to restore Grandpa Lawrence's financial support, and that I was completely done with their manipulation forever. That's when they made their crucial mistake. We'll do absolutely anything to make this right, Dad texted back within minutes. Just tell us what it would take for you to come home and talk to your grandfather about giving us another chance. Name your price. They shouldn't have said anything. My response was simple and direct. I'll consider coming back if and only if Natalie moves out permanently. She's 25 years old. She's been working for 2 years now and should have her own apartment by this point. If you choose her over Grandpa Lawrence's support, that tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. I had absolutely zero intention of ever moving back home, regardless of what they decided. This was purely a test to see if they'd actually choose me over their precious golden child, when forced to make a real decision with real consequences. The silence that followed my ultimatum was incredibly telling. 4 days, they didn't respond at all. Meanwhile, life with Grandpa Lawrence was everything I'd been missing my entire life. He actually listened when I talked, asked thoughtful questions about my interests, helped me research graduate school programs and scholarship opportunities. We cooked dinner together, watched classic movies, and had genuine conversations about my future. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on his back patio looking out at Lake Washington, "I'm genuinely proud of how you handled this entire situation. It took real courage to stand up for yourself like that." He also revealed more family history that my parents had deliberately never shared with me. My mother had struggled with severe postpartum depression after I was born, complicated by the fact that her own mother had died from cancer just months into the pregnancy. She'd actually blamed me for bringing bad luck to the family, believing my existence had somehow cursed them. "They seriously considered putting you up for adoption," Grandpa Lawrence admitted quietly, pain evident in his voice. "Your grandmother and I had to intervene extensively to keep you with the family, but I don't think your parents ever fully accepted that you were meant to be here." Finally understanding the root of their rejection was both incredibly painful and strangely liberating. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. But my peaceful new life was about to be disrupted by an extremely unwelcome visitor who would prove just how far my family was willing to go. 2 weeks after delivering my ultimatum, I was walking home from University of Washington with my friend Bennett, a defensive end on the football team who'd become my unofficial bodyguard since I'd told him about my family situation. As we approached the campus parking lot, I spotted a familiar figure leaning against a silver Lexus. "Natalie." My stomach immediately tensed with dread. "Bennett," I said quietly, touching his arm. "Can you walk me all the way home today? I have a really bad feeling about this." Bennett nodded without asking questions. He's built like a linebacker and has always been fiercely protective of his friends. More importantly, he knew the entire story about my family and understood exactly why I might need backup. Natalie followed us silently for several blocks, staying about 20 feet behind us the entire time. The whole situation felt ominous and deliberately intimidating. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and spun around to confront her. "What do you want, Natalie?" "I need to talk to you privately," she said coldly, glancing at Bennett with obvious disdain. "Without your little bodyguard standing there." "Then you're completely out of luck," I replied firmly. "Because I don't want to talk to you at all, privately or otherwise." That's when she launched into her carefully prepared speech about how much stress and drama I was supposedly causing our parents, how my unreasonable demands were tearing the family apart, and how selfish I was being by forcing them to choose between their daughters. "Mom and Dad finally told me about your absolutely ridiculous condition," she said, her voice getting shrill and unstable. "You actually expect them to kick me out of my own home just to satisfy your petty jealousy? That's genuinely psychotic, Vera." I looked at her for a long moment, then smiled calmly. "If I can't be happy, then neither can you," I said slowly, using her exact words from my birthday. "That's the same logic you used to cancel my party, remember? I think it applies perfectly here." Then I turned around and started walking away with Bennett. That's when Natalie completely lost control of herself. She started screaming at me, calling me horrible, vindictive, selfish, manipulative. When I casually flipped her off without even turning around, she must have absolutely snapped because the next thing I knew, I was face down on the sidewalk with her full weight pressing on my back. Thankfully, Bennett reacted immediately. Within seconds, he'd lifted Natalie off me like she weighed nothing and was holding her at arm's length while she struggled and cursed at both of us. I was absolutely furious. The sheer audacity of her attacking me and thinking she could somehow get away with it was unbelievable. I walked right up to her and slapped her as hard as I physically could across the face. "If you ever try something like that again," I said clearly, "I'll call the police immediately. And given how much trouble you've already caused Mom and Dad, I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate dealing with assault charges on top of everything else." Even then, she tried to continue arguing, but Bennett and I simply walked away. She didn't follow us after that slap. When I got home and told Grandpa Lawrence what had happened, he wanted to call the police right then and there. But I convinced him it wasn't worth the hassle. Natalie had learned her lesson, and she was already in an extremely precarious position with our parents. I also finally told him about the condition I'd given my parents. Instead of being upset, he actually laughed and said it was brilliantly strategic. They absolutely deserved to squirm for a while, he said with satisfaction. Let's see if they finally show you where their real priorities actually lie. 2 days later, we got our answer, and it was even more brutal than I'd expected. The message from my parents came on a Thursday morning while I was eating breakfast with Grandpa Lawrence. It was short, direct, and brutally honest in a way I'd never expected. We've decided to let Natalie continue living with us. You've shown us that you're not the kind of person we want influencing her anymore. You've always been jealous, vindictive, and manipulative. The only reason we wanted you back was for your grandfather's financial support, but your mother's brother has agreed to become a business partner in the firm, so we don't need that anymore. We don't want you around our family. I showed the message to Grandpa Lawrence, half expecting him to be upset or angry. Instead, he just shook his head sadly and said, "Well, that certainly settles that question. At least now you know exactly where you stand with them." Honestly, I wasn't hurt by their rejection at all. I'd known from the very beginning that they only wanted me back for the money. Having them finally admit it out loud was almost refreshing in its complete honesty. What did surprise me was the follow-up message they sent a few hours later, when my lack of response apparently got under their skin. "We are blocking you now because you're a horrible, heartless, violent, and ungrateful person. After everything we did for you, feeding you, clothing you, sending you to school, you still have the nerve to act like we are bad parents. You should be thanking us for providing the bare minimum instead of complaining about everything." Before they could block me, I blocked them first. I was done with their manipulation forever. Life moved forward beautifully after that final message. I got accepted to a graduate program at Columbia University with a full scholarship, and Grandpa Lawrence enthusiastically covered my living expenses in New York as promised. I started officially dating Bennett, and we went to graduation together before he got drafted to play professional football. The best part was watching karma work its absolute magic on my parents and Natalie. Word spread rapidly through our extended family about why Grandpa Lawrence had cut them off financially, and gradually most of Dad's relatives stopped speaking to them entirely. Their social circle in Seattle began to shrink dramatically as people learned the truth about how they'd treated me for 20 years. Mom's family still maintained some contact with them, but they were essentially isolated from everyone else. Last month, I heard through mutual friends that Natalie finally moved out and got her own studio apartment in Capitol Hill. Apparently, living with our parents became absolutely unbearable once they lost their financial stability and had to drastically downsize their lifestyle. They sold the house and moved to a small rental in Renton. Bennett and I are still together, even though his football career keeps him traveling constantly. We see each other whenever his schedule allows, and we are planning to get engaged next year. I've made incredible friends in New York, and for the first time in my entire life, I feel like myself, not someone's lesser sister or unwanted burden. Grandpa Lawrence and I are closer than ever. He visits me in New York regularly, and I fly back to Seattle for holidays. He's become the parent I always needed, and I know I can count on him for absolutely anything. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my parents had just apologized sincerely after my 20th birthday, if they'd actually tried to change their behavior instead of manipulating me. But honestly, I'm grateful things worked out exactly as they did. I'm finally free, finally valued, and finally living the life I deserve. And I've never been happier.